Usually I try to avoid talking about this because it's a topic that goes sour very easily. And then if you try and explain why you feel how you do, it seems like you've gone overly in depth over something minor, and that in itself comes across like overblown criticism. I'm bothering with this because the topic comes up like clockwork at this point, and it's kind of interesting how hard to grapple with the other side it starts to feel. Toyotaro is far from a master of anatomy and other aspects of art, and he'd never claimed to be one. This can make it hard to tell when something is intentionally done for style's sake, and more often than that, it causes arguments because of how you receive art and where the line between acceptable in service of something bigger and broken, messy, or whatever else is different for every single person. You could then argue there's a professional standard, but then someone else could argue a lot of the most famous artists in the same field also made the same mistakes, anatomy ones or otherwise. But then someone else in turn could argue there's a clear difference in understanding there, even if they share certain mistakes at face value. It goes on and on and on. Gohan's long fucking arm is the current example. Most accept that it's technically anatomically incorrect, some haven't, but believe it's for a good reason, that it looks cool. Comparisons in its defense have been made to anything from other exaggerated drawings to 3D models put out of proportion. Personally, I find some of these comparisons invalid because the difference between a relatively out-of-perspective side shot and a disproportionate 3D model explains itself. Yet that's one of several points being made. It would be disingenuous to pretend everyone defending Toyo made this argument. It's also what I see in that one argument. There could be points of comparison I haven't even considered because that's how opinions work. Then there's the matter of how worthwhile discussing this even is. Does it really matter that these mistakes are in a series of kids' books, or whatever you believe they are? Maybe it does. Dragon Ball's a huge series, it's involved hundreds of artists over its production, and it's inspired millions of fans. But then maybe what that means to a person isn't dependent on how technically accurate it is. But maybe what it is dependent on is something Toyotaro misses because he references too much, or he draws bodies incorrectly, or he does this or that. Or maybe you're willing to accept he has made those mistakes, but they don't ruin him for you. You get the point. It's what I said earlier, but with context. There are objective truths in reality about how anatomy can work, lighting, perspective, everything. People often make the mistake of believing those facts must solidly apply to art, but remember, what everyone is willing to accept, enjoy, dislike, or look the other way for varies from person to person. That is why art is subjective. A famous piece of artwork can be universally loved for doing so much right, but that doesn't make its quality an absolute fact. Someone in the minority could see something wrong with it, so would them being able to argue their point consistently diminish everything about that artwork for everyone? Of course not. But as long as their viewpoint is consistent, what they've seen is valid in its own way. We often try to surround ourselves with like-minded people in terms of what we regard important because we can relate to how they feel, but make no mistake, even your friends have different lines of tolerance and everything else. It's just on an often irrelevant level. It's why one day or on days gone by you can argue with friends over anything. And of course, sometimes those differences are why we enjoy other people too. To bring this back around to the point, it's not so crazy that someone thinks Toyotaro art is bad and jokes about it now and then. It's not so crazy that someone thinks his mistakes don't matter because the good overwhelms the bad for that person. The one big thing I haven't mentioned is an artist's intent, and there's a good reason for that. There is something objective to track when an artist says, I wanted to do this, and then did or didn't. Is that really what most of this is about though? You can cling to examples to make a case or statements for an argument, but when it comes to people losing their shit over 2-word tweets, it's not about that, is it? It's about a feeling first, and an attempt to rationalize it following. I don't want to come across like I believe I'm better than most people because there have been times I've gotten irrational over subjective things too. I'm just disconnected emotionally enough from this argument to see it for what it is, at its worst. It's seeing someone who likes or dislikes a thing you don't and not understanding that. It's understanding the reasons you have to feel the way you do, but not stopping to consider they may have reasons to feel the way they feel. I'd also like to think I'm not deluded. I know this will change the minds of few people if any. I know there are times extreme views don't deserve tolerance, and I know some people understand everything I've said and thought no shit every time I open my mouth this video. So, for the few people who maybe hadn't considered this, especially those who fall into this cycle of back and forth jabs about an artist who keeps dividing people, you have a chance every time this happens to speak to that other person. You might be able to figure out why they don't agree with you, and that might be a permanent solution to the annoyance or worry you feel, even if you still disagree by the end. Art is probably the most subjective thing we deal with. It's often at its best when it highlights what's unique about a person, and that uniqueness isn't limited to another person's idea of correct. Talking about that can be really interesting, sometimes more interesting than the art itself. So why waste that on button heads every time the same shit comes up? Don't tell me it's because it doesn't matter that much. So many of you keep wasting time and energy scratching the surface, and for what? To validate the way you feel and yet be annoyed or angry or worried or tired, all the same by the end of it. If that's how you want to be and you believe it's human to shut down what's different, or you think it's just funny being blunt, or you simply don't care, I'm sure nothing I could ever say will dent that line of thinking. All I can say is the chance to figure out why people think differently is right there, and some of you might find there's more to how they feel than it seems. I'm gonna shut the fuck up now.